Hope is getting ready to celebrate its 30th anniversary as a church. Exciting, isn't it?
It's very exciting.
Yeah, 30 years is an important milestone. We may still be young, but we have some history between us, right? So over the next few weeks, we'll be focused on Hope's 30th anniversary. We'll be looking at how the church has grown and expanded its influence and how the church will move into the future. So we thought we'd begin by asking Jeff and Marilyn Bills to share some memories of those early days, to share what was going on in life and ministry 30 years ago. So Jeff, you mentioned to me that there was a question or a thought that was going through your head during that time, actually more than 30 years ago, before the launch of Hope Church.
Yeah, so during those times, I was in my first full-time pastoral job. I was the associate at Haddonfield Methodist Church and excited about that. But I began to realize that none of the guys that I grew up with in high school, I grew up in Monmouth County, and none of the guys that I knew and hung out with were going to church or seemed to be active in their faith at all. And as I looked around at the church that I was now on staff with, I thought, none of these guys would ever come to this church.
Right.
You know, it was a great church. We loved that church, good ministry going on. But none of my friends listened to classical music, certainly didn't listen to organ music. And so that was kind of going on in my brain about what would it take to get my friends to come to church, to hear the gospel of Jesus.
And then about that same time, you both had an opportunity to go to Ghana, and you had an experience while at a worship service.
Ghana was an interesting experience. The Ghanaian church was started by British missionaries, so the church was very Anglican in style, very high church, and so the worship services were this very traditional, almost familiar format until they got to the offering. And when they got to the offering, all of a sudden the instruments came out, the drums and the tambourines, and people got out of their pews and started dancing down the aisle to this incredible African music. And what it did for me is that the offering, which in our church experience was, okay, it became this rote, again, we've got to pull out the wallet and throw money in the basket as it comes around. In Ghana, it was this celebration. And it was such a high worship moment and it was the first time in the worship service where I felt that the Ghanaian people were being true to themselves.
So the other thing about Ghana, so Ghana's in West Africa, and what was going on, and this is mid to late 1980s,
89?
and there was explosive growth going on in the church at that time, and so we were watching this happen and hearing from pastors and missionaries and people around us about the growth of the church, which was so exciting. The biggest problem they were having was staffing, getting pastors to these churches that were starting in villages around the country. That was just such a cool and different experience, because what was going on in the States, and continues, unfortunately, was stories of the church in decline and churches closing. So to see the opposite of that happening was really inspiring to us.
During the early stages of launching this church, you began with a phone campaign. And we've heard stories of the phone campaign, but tell us real quick the summary of what the phone campaign was all about.
The phone campaign was about inviting people who did not already have a church home to come to church. In fact, that was the very first thing that we asked is, do you currently have a church home? And if they said no, then we continued to invite them.
And that is still a core value today, that visitors are expected.
Yeah, and I think that's the beauty of the phone campaign was, didn't matter what your last name was, didn't matter what street you lived on, we didn't know who you were, we were just inviting you to come to church.
So what was this church going to look like?
Yeah, what are the things that are important to us? What's worship going to look like? And And part of it was that we don't have to answer all of those questions right now, that we know what it needs to look like for today, but as times change, as circumstances change, the church can change with it. So one of the core convictions has been that the gospel is unchanging. The truth of Jesus is eternal. But all of the stuff that we do to celebrate that and all the things that we do to teach that, those things have always changed.
So for the first 9 years, Hope met in different school buildings, right? Started in Signal Hill Elementary, moved on, or I know you've heard you say graduated to Eastern High School. So share a little bit of what that was like.
Yeah, so the school thing was, and you did it as well with Mount Laurel, it's both exciting and challenging, because you have to come in and set it up every week. What that allowed, we created what we called at the time service family teams. So a team of folks would commit to 1 week a month and come in and set up, transform the lobby of the school into the church lobby and the worship space, or the auditorium into worship space. And that was really good in terms of people getting involved and buying in. Nobody had to be an expert to help move stuff around. The other thing that that the schools allowed was for folks, because we're trying to attract people who didn't go to church. And one of the blocks for people coming to church was, frankly, going into a church building. So whatever that church building was, there was a certain, people would be feeling uncomfortable for whatever reason. And so by meeting in a school, all of that was gone. Because we weren't in a traditional building, they came in and they didn't have their guard up, and so they were more responsive to the message.
Yeah, but school days didn't last forever. Right, you did decide to build a building, and so Hope built its first building on 700 Cooper Road in 1999.
So I completed, yep.
Yeah, and so on that opening Sunday of the building, you told me something that you said during the worship service, and I found it connects so well, really connects to our current socially distanced lifestyle, and I'm sure you remember what you said, because you knew I was going to ask you what you said.
And I'm going to throw a curveball, because there's another thing that in the design of the building, we have this glass wall all the way through the lobby to the outside. And that was a intentional decision, because we didn't want it to be about a building. And so architecturally anyway, it says that you can see in through the building into what the church is, which is the gathered community. And that the community is looking out into the world and not losing sight of the fact that we are called to be out in that world. So that was the glass. But the thing that you were asking about, on that first Sunday in this worship space, it was actually our anniversary, our 9th anniversary as a church in '99. And one of the things I just felt called to say to people was, don't fall in love with this building. That we worked really hard to get it, and people invested time and effort and money and so forth. But we've never been about buildings, and we can't start being about buildings now.
There are things about ministry where the building has enhanced ministry.
It's a great tool.
Yes,
Having
it's a tool,
band
right.
rehearsals in our living room wasn't best. But the building then becomes a crutch if we forget that we're called to go outside of these walls.
Yeah.
So it's,
And again, because of the time we're in right now, it's so important that we understand that the church never was about the building, and it's not about the building now, obviously. So we miss being together. That's what we miss. We don't miss the building. We miss being together in community. We still want to be a church that is concerned for men and women who don't have a faith, who are outside of the church. That we're never so committed to our systems and the ways that we do things that we become irrelevant to whatever the culture is at the time. It's not that we conform to the culture, but that we speak into the culture in effective ways. And that we're not about buildings. We're really about the gospel.